In the year 1955, Soichiro Honda announced that his company, Honda, would be going into the car business, to the surprise of many people. Newspapers, car journalists, and a couple of his closest friends told him Honda was better off making motorcycles alone and that there was no space for Honda in the automobile industry, while the Japanese government threatened him to stay out of the business. But Soichiro refused. After all, it wouldn't be the first time he would be told that he would fail. You see, Japan at the time already had the likes of Nissan, Toyota, and some other car manufacturers competing for a share of the market. Meanwhile, Honda was already the largest motorbike manufacturer in the world. These were some of the things the Japanese government pointed out to Soichiro when they asked him not to go into the car market. But Soichiro replied to the government by saying, "I simply cannot go along with the idea that in order to protect our jobs, we should set limits on the import of foreign cars. Technological competition should be conducted by technological means. No matter what barriers we put in their way, quality products will always find a way in. Good products know no national boundaries. Being the best means nothing when you're only comparing yourself with the rest of Japan." However, Soichiro Honda refused, and despite the threats he received from the government, as well as many people telling him he was making a mistake, Soichiro defied the government and went ahead with the project. It was a big risk that could have potentially put Soichiro and Honda out of business, but Soichiro's dream, right from when he was just an 8-year-old boy, had always been to build a car, and he couldn't let anyone get in the way of it. Besides, Soichiro at the time was already one of the richest and most influential men in Japan. But that wasn't always the case. Soichiro was once a poor kid with nothing but a dream. Soichiro Honda was born on the 17th of November 1906 in Hamamatsu, Shizuoka, a poverty-riddled town in Japan. His father, Gei, was a local blacksmith in the village who also ran a bicycle repair shop, while his mother mostly stayed at home where she weaved to support the family and raise the kids. The financial situation at home was so bad that Soichiro lost 5 siblings to ill health. Despite being helpless in the face of tragedy and poverty, Soichiro's parents made sure they instilled discipline in their surviving kids. But Soichiro didn't let his humble upbringing stop him from chasing his dreams. As he would later say in his life, it wasn't necessary to be born a nobleman or rich to succeed in life. There are other qualities which also lead to success: courage, perseverance, the ability to dream, and to persevere. As a young child, Soichiro was a very curious and handy individual. As a result, he was always interested in how machines, vehicles, and tools worked. But this was mainly due to a particular event that changed his life forever. You see, when Soichiro was 8, he was just like any kid in town, playing around with other kids his age. Then, one day, he heard the sound of a strange machine and traced the source till he came in contact with it. Lo and behold, it was a car, the first one he'd ever seen. The 8-year-old gushed in excitement, but at the same time, he couldn't understand how this powerful piece of metal could move under its own power, and it troubled him. This moment left a big mark in his life because he became pretty much obsessed with tools and machines afterwards. Luckily for young Soichiro, his father owned a bicycle repair shop and he got introduced to assembling bicycles. Every father's dream is to watch their son become better versions of themselves. So, when Soichiro's father noticed his son's ingenuity and how crafty he was with tools, he was impressed. But at the same time, he wanted to see his son get a formal education so that he wouldn't end up like him. So, he did everything within his power to send Soichiro to school. However, Soichiro hated school, and it didn't help matters that his classmates gave him the nickname Black-Nose Weasel, which is less derogatory in Japanese than it sounds in English because his face was always dirty from helping his father in the forge. But Soichiro didn't care. As far as he was concerned, a diploma was less useful than a ticket to a movie, and besides, He knew it was just a matter of time before he dropped out. That opportunity would eventually come just 8 years later. We only have one future, and it will be made of our dreams if we have the courage to challenge convention. Being the son of a poor blacksmith and having terrible grades in school doesn't sound like a good recipe for anyone willing to be anything in life, and this certainly was the case with Honda. Yet, Honda would go on to become one of the richest men in Japan. In the year 1929, Soichiro was working in his father's workshop when he came across a job advert in the newspaper by Art Shokai, a Tokyo-based company. The company was looking for mechanics who were skilled at repairing motorcycles, automobiles, and gasoline engines. Soichiro at the time didn't have any of these skills, but he reasoned that the company was probably a big auto repair company in Tokyo. His dream was to become an automobile engineer who could someday build a car of his own. But he knew he needed to understand how a car worked in the first place and how to repair one, and Art Shokai seemed like the place he could do just that. So, Soichiro wrote a letter to the company asking for a job, writing in detail about how he was going to be an asset. Although he had zero expertise or experience in the skill sets they were looking for, the company was so impressed with his letter that they were willing to offer him a job. So, at the tender age of 15, when most kids were still living in their father's home with no clear idea about their future, Soichiro left his hometown for Tokyo in search of his. Little did he know that the decision he made was the beginning of the great feats he would achieve in life. Instead of being afraid of the challenge and the failure, be afraid of avoiding the challenge and doing nothing. When Honda made his way to Tokyo in 1929, he was both thrilled and excited. But all that excitement he had soon turned to anger, frustration, and disappointment when he arrived in Tokyo. First, the city was fast, big, and nothing compared to life in the village, and the city life seemed to overwhelm the 15-year-old. To make matters worse, Soichiro was only assigned to menial jobs and was not allowed the one thing he came to Tokyo to do, which was to work on automobiles. But he didn't let the disappointment faze him. He diligently did everything that was asked of him, hoping that one day he would eventually be spotted by someone, and that he was. His boss, Yuzo Sakakibara, noticed his potential and immediately took the now 16-year-old under his wings. Under him, Soichiro learned both the mechanical and business sides of things. Soon enough, Soichiro's talent and skill became obvious to everyone who worked in and out of the company. This is something the former president of Honda Motor Company would later reference. He learned so much by doing real work with real machines. He didn't just have theoretical knowledge. He was an expert at all sorts of practical tasks like welding and forging. Those of us who had only studied the subject on paper from an academic standpoint just couldn't compete. While there was no doubt about Soichiro's talent, it was his concentration on the job and his never-die attitude that made him stand out among his peers and seniors at the company. Speaking about this period later in his life, Soichiro said, "I let no one disturb my concentration. Even hunger could not disturb me." This attitude to work saw him become the first and only apprentice in Art Shokai to be permitted to an open branch. The vehicle repair store was a big step in his career, and Honda made sure he didn't take it for granted. And within a few years, the branch had grown from a one-man shop to having 30 staff working for him. Honda was a hard worker who believed in working 24 hours and 7 days a week if that was the price that had to be paid, a value his father instilled in him during his early years. A good example of this was when he grew tired and weary of his repair work and asked the shareholders of Art Shokai to start manufacturing pistons. The shareholders refused. So, Honda decided to start his own company, Tokai Precision Machine Company. The whole idea behind the company was to manufacture car parts, specifically piston rings, which he planned to sell to Toyota. Soichiro knew it was going to be difficult, but what he didn't know was how difficult it was going to be, and in this case, working hard alone wasn't going to be enough to cut it. Soichiro initially began an art piston ring research center where he worked tirelessly. He would spend his day at his repair factory and his nighttime developing pistons, but his venture bore no fruits. After over a year of trying and spending his entire savings without really making any breakthrough, Soichiro admitted he didn't have enough knowledge to create one. So he changed his attitude towards education and decided to enroll as a part-time student at Hamamatsu Industrial Institute to improve his knowledge in metallurgy. Speaking about this time, Honda said, "The only thing that interested me was acquiring knowledge that I lacked as quickly as possible." This was a big step for Honda because up until that point he hated the idea of school and had famously told his friends if the theory promoted creativity, then all teachers would have been the inventors. While the experience didn't completely alter the way he felt about school and education, still, Soichiro was willing to compromise his own beliefs if it meant getting a result. And the result he got as he would finally make a breakthrough in 1939. Later that year, Toyota contacted him to make pistons for the company, and out of the 50 he submitted, only 3 passed Toyota's quality test. After the test, Soichiro was both disappointed and embarrassed with himself. But rather than give up, he picked himself back up and spent another 3 years going around the country, visiting universities and steel companies to improve his knowledge until he felt he had learned enough to give the pistons a go again. Soichiro himself would famously say, "Success represents the 1% of your work which results from the 99% that is called failure." When he finally tried again, the result was beyond his wildest dreams, as the pistons were so good that Toyota and other car manufacturers in Japan came calling. The company ended up becoming so big that he had over 2,000 staff working at the company. Sadly, Soichiro nearly lost everything during the Second World War and was forced to sell his company. After the war, Soichiro took a deserved 1-year break before going on to create one of the largest automobile companies in the world. Hard work, talent, determination, and drive are just a few of the many things that made Soichiro Honda very successful at Art Shokai and then at his first company, Tokai Precision Machine Company. Yet, none of these two companies was anywhere as successful as Honda. The reason for that is simple. Honda was built on one of the very principles or tenets of every successful entrepreneur, which is to find a problem and sell the solution. You see, after the Second World War, Japan found itself in a dire economic situation where 90% of its citizens could barely afford food and shelter. Gas literally became gold, and there weren't enough cars in the country for people to move or transport themselves from one place to another. One fateful day, Honda was making his way home when he found a generator engine. He immediately became fascinated with the engine and figured that if he attached the engine to a bicycle, he could create a more affordable means of transport. That single idea would give birth to Honda. However, Soichiro wasn't the only one working on making a cheap means of transportation or motorbikes. Neither did he invent motorcycles in the very first place. So, how come he succeeded where many others failed? You see, when Soichiro began working on creating his first motorcycle, Japan's economy was in shambles. And as a result, individuals or companies who were equally trying to create a cheaper means of transport eventually got broke and closed their businesses in trying to do so. Soichiro himself ran into the same problem when he completed his first motorbike, as his friends started asking him to make some for them. And eventually, he had made so many bikes that he ran out of cash and engines. He knew he needed money to make more engines, but with the country's economy on its knees, getting anyone to invest was like searching for water in a hot desert. While most people would have given up, Soichiro summoned all the energy he had and wrote an inspiring letter to 18,000 bicycle shop owners, asking for their support to rebuild the country. This was a time when there were no emails or anything like that. So, in other words, Soichiro sat and hand-wrote 18,000 personal letters. Luckily for him, 3,000 bicycle shop owners responded and gave him what little money they had to build his engines. Less than a decade later, his company, Honda, would become the biggest motorbike manufacturer in the world. However, drive and determination alone weren't the only reasons for Honda's success. Soichiro's insistence on producing quality motorbikes that rivaled and surpassed those of his competitors also played a huge role in this. A good example of this can be seen when he launched the 98cc D-Type, aka the Dream, Honda's first complete, full-scale motorcycle in 1949. This was a period when most of his competitors in Japan were still finding it difficult to make full-sized motorcycles, and because of this, the Dream didn't just become Honda's best-selling motorbike, it also raised Honda's profile in the eyes of consumers. You see, people like to associate themselves with quality products, and if customers see they can get a better product elsewhere, they'll go in search of it, no matter how loyal they are to whom they were previously buying from, even if it's slightly more expensive. Soichiro realized this, and it became a model for all the successes that were to follow. The engineering genius himself would buttress this point later in his life, saying, "If you make a superior product, people will buy it." And that's exactly what he did. It was simple. Recognize a need, create a unique way to satisfy it, incorporate unusual performance, quality, and reliability, and then build from an expanding reputation into yet other areas. This pattern defined the Honda way. However, producing a quality product is easier said than done. It takes a lot of drive, experience, and know-how to get it done, and Soichiro achieved this by hiring the most talented mechanics and engineers around, and he expected nothing less from them. But when he didn't get the desired results or saw poorly done work, he would fly into a rage and throw things around. Soichiro especially demanded accuracy in parts manufacturing, and he did so for two reasons: so that they could be made by untrained workers instead of master craftsmen, and so they could be replaced by distant dealers or mechanics just as easily as they had been installed at the factory. Because of this, people who bought his motorcycles knew they were getting nothing but the best, and that brought more and more customers to Honda. Soichiro opened his first dealership in Los Angeles in 1959 with 6 employees. By 1963, Honda had become the top-selling brand of motorcycles in the United States. In 1961, the company produced 100,000 motorcycles in a month, and by 1968, Honda had sold its millionth bike. Soichiro's feisty temper made his employers diligent, and although it didn't always bring in loyalty, those who stayed with him understood what his vision for the company was and the things they stood to gain in that future. All the time Soichiro had spent back when he was still learning to develop a piston ring had taught him how invaluable research wasn't just for personal growth as a person, but also as a company. By setting up the Honda Research Center, he created a system that encouraged innovation within the company, and this allowed Honda to stay ahead of its competitors. Despite creating a research institute at Honda, Soichiro realized that another way to stay ahead of its competitors, if not the best way, was to study them. So, in 1954, he declared to his workers that Honda would participate in the prestigious Isle of Man Tourist Trophy motorcycle race to win. When Soichiro was asked about his decision to enter the competition by the press, he famously said, "If Honda does not race, there's no Honda." His employees were baffled as the company was facing a bankruptcy crisis. But it was precisely because the future of the company seemed bleak that Honda wished to give his employees a big goal. His subsequent decision to enter Formula One also came at a difficult period, with Honda having only recently entered the auto market the year before. This was despite the government telling Soichiro to remain in the motorcycle industry. In both instances, no one believed that Honda, who was still a small manufacturer, could succeed in either circuit. But Soichiro went on to prove his doubters wrong. By encouraging his engineers to give their all and not be afraid of making a mistake, Soichiro was able to guide them through numerous challenges. The technologies and skills Honda developed by studying and competing in both circuits became valuable assets for the company, as seen by the following stats. In 1961, Honda was producing 100,000 motorcycles per month. That number would multiply by 10 times in 1968. with Honda producing 1 million motorcycles a month. By the mid-80s, Soichiro was holding 60% of the world market in his hands. There's no doubt that Soichiro put the Honda brand on the automotive map, but it was never a one-man show with Honda. You see, most successful companies always have a backbone that's never necessarily the founder or president of the company. For instance, Apple had Steve Jobs spearheading the vision, while Steve Wozniak performed miracles behind the scenes. When Ford wanted to beat Ferrari at Le Mans, there were two individuals. Henry Ford II sold the vision, but he also had Carroll Shelby, who worked tirelessly to get the job done. And in the case of Honda was Takeo Fujisawa, who together with Soichiro helped build the company into a global brand. While Honda handled the engineering, product development, and press, it was Fujisawa that made sure that Honda didn't have to worry too much about the financial side of the business. Honda himself acknowledged this when he said, "If I had to manage my company myself, I would have very quickly gone bankrupt." The two were an odd couple, both in appearance and temperament, but as the saying goes, opposites attract. A scenario to show their relationship and Soichiro's deep understanding of the need to sacrifice as a businessman was when they were about to create the most triumphant technology, engines. Soichiro wanted the engine to be air-cooled, but Fujisawa and everyone else thought it would be better water-cooled. Soichiro, being an engineer, thought he knew better and insisted that air-cooled engines were the future of cars. After so many back and forths, Fujisawa decided to take a bold step that would solve the problem. At a dinner, Fujisawa told Soichiro, "You can do one of two things. You can continue to serve as the president of our company, or you can join the engineers at the factory. I think you should choose now." Soichiro was unhappy that he had to choose, but he chose to be the president and gave the go-ahead to the engineers to make the engines water-cooled. Their conversation had lasted no more than a few minutes, and to further put Honda at ease and show that he had no intention to wrangle power or weaken him, Fujisawa said, "Honda-san, I want you to know that when you quit, I'll quit." The two friends also decided against making their sons or relatives heirs to the company, a common practice among the Japanese at the time. Honda said, "No matter how outstanding the company's founder is, there's no guarantee that his son would be capable of the same. The company's management should be given to a person who has the distinctive qualities of a leader." It was this unique relationship between the two in which both parties had the utmost respect for each other's decisions and ideas, and knowing when to accept the other's decision for the greater good that catapulted Honda to where it is today. At the beginning of the 80s, Honda Motor Company Incorporated was the third largest producer of cars in Japan, and by the end of the decade, it was the third company in the world. Soichiro revolutionized the motorcycle industry. He would also revolutionize Japan's style of management. Soichiro Honda was particularly different from most Japanese businessmen. He attracted press attention, and unlike most Japanese businessmen who hated or shied away from the media, Soichiro embraced it. In fact, you could say he loved it. He was a small but talkative man, a complete opposite of what Westerners imagined Japanese businessmen to be. Honda also raced autos and motorcycles, dressed casually, and took pride in maintaining his independence from the Japanese business establishment. When Soichiro discovered that a rigid environment doesn't necessarily achieve the highest degree of efficiency, he decided to create the Honda Way, which didn't conform to the Japanese managerial traditions. The Honda Way relies on personal initiative coupled with a close relationship between workers and management, a tradition Honda continues to use to this very date. A good example of how the Honda Way continues to stand today can be seen when one of the Honda successors moved the executive suite from the top floor to mid-building, thereby destroying the bridge between regular staff members and executives. Developing a philosophy built on the experiences he had, Soichiro Honda created a corporate culture that would go on working towards his objective, being one of the leading automobile manufacturing companies in the world, even after he was gone. His influence, like the man himself, is still highly visible and will continue to be acknowledged as long as the company exists. Soichiro Honda knew what he wanted from a very young age, and all he did was to realize that dream. He didn't waver. He didn't give up despite encountering so many challenges. Without mincing words, the secret to success is indeed hard work. Many people dream of success. I believe that success can be achieved only through repeated failure and self-analysis. Success is only 1% of your work, and the rest is bold overcoming of obstacles. If you're not afraid of them, success will come to you itself.